The small town of Willowbrook, nestled amid rolling green fields and flanked by whispering woods, buzzed with excitement. The annual Grand Equestrian Festival was in a cozy two-story house on the edge of town. Ella sat by the window, her wheelchair beside her, tracing patterns on the foggy glass. 3 years ago, a car accident left her paralyzed from the waist down. Once an avid rider and lover of horses, she had since avoided anything to do with the world she loved, fearing it would remind her of what she had. Her mother, Grace, entered the room holding an envelope with the fade. "Ella," Grace said gently, placing the envelope on her lap. "I know it's been hard for you, but the festival is something we've always loved. Let's go together." "We don't," Ella hesitated, her fingers brushing the edges of the envelope. "I don't know, Mom. I'm not sure I'm ready to be around all." Grace knelt beside her, her voice soft but resolute. "Sometimes facing what we fear helps us heal. And who knows, maybe it's exactly what you need." After a long pause, Ella nodded. "Okay, let's go." As the festival day arrived, Willowbrook transformed into a scene from a storybook. The vibrant fields became arenas, bustling with vendors, riders, and spectators. Horses of every color and breed dazzled in the sunlight. Ella felt her heart race as Grace wheeled her through the festival grounds. The scent of leather saddles and the rhythmic sound of hooves brought back memories of her riding days. But something caught her eye, a poster of a striking white horse with piercing blue eyes. Beneath it, the words, "Thunder, Wild Beauty of the West." Ella couldn't look away. There was something in Thunder's gaze, an untamed spirit and deep sadness that mirrored her own. That evening, as the festival's main event began, the arena filled with eager spectators. Ella and Grace found their seats near the front, giving them a clear view of the ring. The master of ceremonies stepped forward, his booming voice capturing everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you'll witness something extraordinary. Thunder, the untamed legend, will be brought to the arena. For years, he has defied every attempt to be ridden or tamed. But tonight, we'll see if anyone here has what it takes." The crowd roared with excitement as the gates swung open. Thunder galloped into the arena, his mane flowing like silver in the wind. His every move radiated power and defiance. Ella's heart pounded. As the master of ceremonies invited volunteers to step forward, her hand shot up before she realized what she was doing. Gasps rippled through the audience. Grace gripped Ella's arm. "Ella, no, you can't. I have to," Ella interrupted, her voice steady. "I need to try." As Ella's wheelchair rolled into the arena, the crowd fell silent. Thunder turned to face her, his powerful frame still as stone. His intense blue eyes locked onto hers, and in that moment, an unspoken connection sparked between them. The arena was deathly quiet, save for the occasional snort from Thunder. Ella wheeled herself forward, her every movement deliberate and calm. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, but her focus remained solely on the horse before her. Thunder pawed at the ground, his muscles tense and ready to bolt. The handlers nearby gripped their ropes tightly, prepared to intervene at the first sign of danger. "Ella, please." Grace's voice carried from the sidelines, thick with fear. Ella glanced back briefly, offering her mother a reassuring smile. "Trust me, Mom." Taking a deep breath, she turned her attention back to Thunder. "Hey there, boy," she said softly, her voice barely carrying over the hushed murmurs of the crowd. "I know you don't trust anyone. I don't blame you. I wouldn't either." She extended her hand slowly, palm open. Thunder's ears twitched, his gaze fixed on her with a mix of curiosity and caution. Ella remained still, letting him make the next move. Minutes felt like hours as Thunder lowered his head slightly, his nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air around her. The handlers held their breath, ready to act, but Ella gestured for them to stay back. "It's okay," she whispered, her tone steady and soothing. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to understand you." To everyone's astonishment, Thunder took a cautious step forward, then another. The towering stallion stood mere inches from Ella, his massive frame dwarfing her small figure in the wheelchair. Ella reached out again, her fingers trembling slightly. When her hand met his nose, Thunder flinched but didn't pull away. The audience erupted into murmurs of disbelief, and the master of ceremonies looked as though he'd seen a ghost. "Unbelievable," he muttered into the microphone. "Thunder has never allowed anyone to touch him voluntarily." Ella ignored the commotion around her focus solely on the horse. She ran her hand gently along his nose, marveling at the warmth of his breath and the softness of his coat. "You're not so scary," she said with a small smile. "Just misunderstood." Thunder exhaled deeply, his body relaxing ever so slightly. Ella felt a surge of emotions, joy, awe, and a deep connection she hadn't felt in years. From the sidelines, Grace watched with tears streaming down her face. She had never seen her daughter so alive since the accident. The moment was interrupted when one of the handlers moved too quickly, startling Thunder. The stallion reared up, his front hooves kicking the air, and the crowd screamed in panic. But Ella didn't flinch. "Thunder, it's okay," she called out, her voice firm yet calming. "I'm here. You're safe." To everyone's astonishment, Thunder landed gracefully and turned his head back toward Ella, his eyes softening. He stepped closer, his posture no longer aggressive but protective, as though he recognized her as a kindred spirit. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, tears glistening in the eyes of many. The master of ceremonies, visibly moved, declared, "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we've just witnessed a miracle." Ella patted Thunder's neck, a smile spreading across her face. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that she could reclaim a part of herself she thought was lost forever. As the arena began to empty, a man in a dark suit approached Grace and Ella. He introduced himself as Dr. Marcus Landry, a renowned equine therapist and behaviorist. "What you did tonight was remarkable," he said, his eyes fixed on Ella. "Thunder has resisted every trainer and rider we've brought to him. Yet, with you, he was different. I'd like to work with you and Thunder if you're willing." Ella hesitated, her gaze shifting to Thunder, who now stood calmly beside her. "I don't know. This was just a moment. I'm not sure I can do more than this." Dr. Landry smiled gently. "Sometimes, moments like these are the start of something extraordinary. Think about it." As Ella and Grace left the festival that night, Ella couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The morning after the festival, Ella sat at the kitchen table, her thoughts still swirling from the previous night. The image of Thunder lowering his head to her lingered in her mind, a moment so surreal she half believed she had dreamed it. Grace set a plate of scrambled eggs in front of her. "You barely slept," she said, concern etched on her face. "What's going through your mind?" Ella toyed with her fork. "I keep thinking about what Dr. Landry said. What if he's right? What if Thunder and I have a connection worth exploring?" Grace pulled out a chair and sat across from her daughter. "If that's what you want, I'll support you. But I need you to be sure, Ella. This isn't just about proving something to yourself. It's a commitment, one that might bring challenges." Ella nodded. "I know, Mom. But for the first time in years, I feel alive. I want to see where this leads." By afternoon, Ella called Dr. Landry and agreed to meet him at the Willowbrook stables, where Thunder was housed. Grace drove her there, her hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. When they arrived, Dr. Landry greeted them warmly. "I'm glad you decided to come," he said. "Thunder's been calmer than usual since last night. It's as though he's waiting for you." Ella's heart quickened as they approached Thunder's stall. The majestic stallion stood quietly, his ears perking up as Ella entered the space. He let out a low nicker, stepping forward to nuzzle her hand. "He remembers you," Dr. Landry said, visibly impressed. "This is extraordinary." The next few days were transformative. Under Dr. Landry's guidance, Ella worked with Thunder daily, learning not only how to communicate with him, but also how to understand his behaviors and emotions. Thunder, in turn, responded to Ella with a trust and gentleness no one had ever witnessed. But not everyone was supportive. One afternoon, as Ella practiced guiding Thunder around the training ring, a tall, stern-faced man approached the fence. His name was Hank Matthews, a seasoned horse trainer with a reputation for being blunt and unyielding. "This is a mistake," he said loudly, drawing everyone's attention. That horse doesn't belong with a kid in a wheelchair. He needs a real trainer. Ella felt the sting of his words, but held her ground. Thunder isn't just a horse to be controlled, she said firmly. He needs understanding, not force. Hank snorted. Understanding won't keep you safe when that animal decides to turn wild again. Mark my words, this will end in disaster. Dr. Landry stepped in, his tone measured but firm. Hank, this isn't your call to make. Thunder has shown more progress with Ella in days than he ever did with traditional methods. Hank glared at them both, but eventually stormed off, muttering under his breath. Despite the encounter, Ella refused to let doubt take hold. Her bond with Thunder grew stronger each day, and with Grace's unwavering support, she began to feel a renewed sense of purpose. But as the festival week drew to a close, a new challenge arose. The festival committee approached Ella with an unexpected proposition. They wanted her and Thunder to perform in the festival's closing ceremony, a tribute to their extraordinary connection. Ella hesitated. I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that. What if Thunder gets spooked? What if I fail? Grace placed a hand on her shoulder. You've already done what no one else could, Ella. You've proven that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about facing your fears head-on. If anyone can do this, it's you. Ella looked at Thunder, who stood beside her with a calm confidence. Deep down, she knew this was her chance to show everyone, including herself, what they were capable of. I'll do it, she said, determination lighting her eyes. As preparations for the ceremony began, whispers spread through Willowbrook. Some doubted Ella's abilities, while others cheered her on. Hank, however, seemed more determined than ever to prove she was unfit for the task. The night of the closing ceremony approached quickly, and as Ella prepared for her performance, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. The evening of the closing ceremony arrived with an air of anticipation. The festival grounds were illuminated with strings of twinkling lights, the scent of hay and roasted food filling the air. Families gathered in the grandstands, eager to witness the final spectacle. Behind the scenes, Ella sat in her wheelchair, her nerves simmering beneath the surface. Grace knelt beside her, adjusting the hem of her daughter's riding jacket. You look perfect, Grace said with a reassuring smile. Ella glanced at Thunder, who stood calmly nearby, his white coat shimmering under the stable lights. It's not about looking perfect, Mom. It's about making it through without something going wrong. You've worked hard for this, Grace said, gripping her hand. Remember, no matter what happens, you've already accomplished so much. Dr. Landry appeared moments later, a clipboard in hand. The arena is ready. You'll enter on cue after the opening parade. Thunder looks calm, which is a good sign. Just trust your instincts, Ella. Ella nodded, taking a deep breath. We're ready. As the ceremony began, the sound of trumpets and hooves echoed through the night. Riders performed synchronized routines with their horses, dazzling the crowd. Ella and Thunder waited in the wings, the tension between them palpable. When their cue came, Ella wheeled herself toward Thunder, who immediately lowered his head, allowing her to clip the lead rope onto his halter. The audience fell silent as they stepped into the spotlight. Ella guided Thunder into the center of the arena, her movements deliberate and calm. The crowd erupted into cheers, but she barely registered the noise. Her focus was entirely on Thunder. Easy, boy, she whispered, her voice steady. Thunder moved gracefully beside her, his steps light and deliberate. Ella began the routine they had practiced tirelessly, a series of movements demonstrating their bond and trust. Thunder responded to her commands with precision, his massive frame exuding power and grace. The crowd was mesmerized, but just as Ella began the final sequence, a loud crack of thunder rolled across the sky. The lights flickered, and a sudden gust of wind swept through the arena, causing banners to flap violently. Thunder froze, his ears flattening against his head. The crowd gasped as he reared up, his eyes wide with fear. Ella. Grace's voice cut through the chaos, but Ella didn't look back. It's okay, Thunder, Ella said, her voice firm but soothing. She held the lead rope steady, refusing to let fear consume her. I'm here. You're safe. The stallion's hooves struck the ground with a thud, but he didn't bolt. He turned his head toward Ella, his wild eyes meeting hers. Slowly, his breathing steadied, and his tense muscles relaxed. The crowd erupted into cheers, but Ella barely noticed. She patted Thunder's neck, her own relief washing over her like a wave. As they exited the arena, Dr. Landry rushed to meet them. "That was incredible, Ella. Your composure under pressure is nothing short of remarkable." Ella smiled faintly, but her mind was elsewhere. The storm hadn't been in the forecast, and something about the timing felt off. Later that night, as they packed up to leave, Grace discovered a small, torn piece of paper near Thunder's stall. She handed it to Ella, who unfolded it to reveal a hastily scrawled message. "He's dangerous. Stop while you still can." Ella stared at the note, a chill running down her spine. Who would do this? Grace frowned, glancing around the dimly lit stable. "I don't know, but we're not going to let them scare us." Ella tucked the note into her pocket, her resolve hardening. Whoever was trying to intimidate her had underestimated her determination. She and Thunder had already overcome so much, and she wasn't about to let fear or sabotage stop them now. The days following the closing ceremony passed in a blur for Ella. Despite the triumph of the performance, a lingering unease gnawed at her. The cryptic note she had found in Thunder's stall weighed heavily on her mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was actively trying to sabotage her connection with the horse. Grace noticed the shift in her daughter's demeanor. "Ella, you've been quiet since the ceremony. What's going on?" Ella sighed, running a hand through her hair. "That note, I can't stop thinking about it. It doesn't make sense. Who would want to hurt Thunder or me? And why now?" Grace sat beside her, her brow furrowed. "We don't know who left it, but we'll figure it out. Thunder's been a challenge for so many people. Maybe someone feels threatened by what you're doing with him." Ella nodded slowly, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. "I don't know. It just feels like something more, like we're being watched. I keep hearing footsteps at night when we're alone in the barn." Grace took her daughter's hand, squeezing it gently. "I'll stay with you tonight. We'll keep an eye out together." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness enveloped the stables, Ella and Grace settled into the barn, staying close to Thunder. The horse was calm, grazing contentedly in his stall, but Ella couldn't ignore the unease that seemed to hang in the air. Around midnight, a faint sound echoed from the far side of the stable. A footstep, then another, muffled by the thick layers of hay and straw. Ella's heart raced as she sat up, straining her ears to identify the source. "Did you hear that?" Ella whispered to Grace, her voice tense. Grace nodded, her face pale. "I did. Stay here." Before Ella could protest, Grace rose and crept toward the source of the sound. Ella held her breath, her eyes darting nervously between the stalls. Just as Grace reached the corner of the barn, a shadow darted out from behind a stack of hay bales. Grace gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice sharp. The figure froze, momentarily caught in the light from the lantern Grace held. It was Hank Matthews. His eyes widened in surprise, his hand raised in a defensive gesture. "What are you doing here?" Grace demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. I was just checking on Thunder," Hank stammered, his usual bravado slipping. "I thought he might have been acting up again." Ella wheeled herself forward, her eyes narrowing. "You were spying on us, weren't you? You left that note." Hank's face hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about." He took a step back, avoiding her gaze. "I'm just looking out for Thunder. He's dangerous, and you're not equipped to handle him." Grace stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. "You don't get to come in here and accuse us of anything. We've been nothing but good to Thunder. You've been pushing your agenda from the start, Hank. Now you've crossed a line." Hank hesitated, his eyes flicking between Ella and Grace, then lowered his head. "You don't understand, do you? Thunder isn't just any horse. He's been trained to perform, to be controlled. People like you, people who don't see him for what he really is, don't belong in the arena with him." Ella's heart skipped a beat as the pieces began to fall into place. "You don't care about Thunder, do you? You just want to keep him under your control. He's not just a prize to be won. He's a living being with his own thoughts and feelings. Hank clenched his fists. You think you're special? You think you're the only one who can tame him? You'll fail. They all do. Before Ella could respond, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the barn. Thunder's frantic whinnies rang out, and the sound of hooves pounding against the ground filled the air. Ella's stomach dropped. What did you do to him, Hank? She demanded, her voice trembling with fear. Hank's face twisted in frustration, and for a moment, Ella thought he might lash out. Instead, he turned on his heel and stormed toward Thunder's stall. Ella and Grace followed as quickly as they could, but what they saw when they reached Thunder's stall left them breathless. Thunder was trapped, his powerful body tangled in the ropes that had been left in his stall. He thrashed against the restraints, his movements frantic and wild. His eyes were wide with terror, and it was clear that he had been spooked by something. No, 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 Ella cried, rushing to Thunder's side. She tried to calm him, but the panic in his eyes was too much for her to handle. Hank stood off to the side, watching with a mixture of disdain and satisfaction. I told you he wasn't meant for someone like you, he muttered. Grace rushed to Ella's side, her face pale. We need to get him free. With trembling hands, Ella and Grace worked together, slowly and carefully cutting the ropes that bound Thunder. The horse's frantic movements only worsened as they tried to help him, but Ella's voice remained steady, whispering soothing words to him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Thunder was free. He stumbled back, breathing heavily, his body covered in sweat. I'm sorry, boy, Ella murmured, her heart aching as she gently stroked his mane. You're safe now. But as the tension began to ease, Ella's mind raced. Hank had tried to sabotage her, just as she had feared. The events of the night weighed heavily on Ella's mind as she sat beside Thunder, who was now calm, though still visibly shaken. Grace had gone inside to make a few calls, likely notifying the festival organizers about Hank's behavior, but Ella remained with the horse, her thoughts swirling in confusion and anger. Hank's words echoed in her ears. Thunder isn't meant for someone like you. What did he mean by that? Why was he so determined to control Thunder? And why had he tried to sabotage her? The soft sound of hooves outside the stall drew Ella out of her thoughts. Looking up, she saw Dr. Landry approaching, his expression concerned. I heard what happened, Dr. Landry said, his voice low. Is Thunder all right? Ella nodded, running a hand through her hair. He will be. It doesn't make sense. Hank was trying to sabotage us. He left a note, and now he's done this. Dr. Landry stepped closer, his brow furrowing in thought. I've seen Hank act like this before, but never so openly. I think there's something more to this than meets the eye, Ella. Grace reappeared at the entrance, her face pale but determined. The organizers are dealing with Hank now. They've revoked his participation in future events, but I don't think this is over. Ella looked at her mother, her heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. I need to know the truth, Mom. Why is Hank so obsessed with Thunder? What does he know that we don't? Grace took a deep breath and sat down beside her daughter. There's something I've been meaning to tell you. I've hesitated to bring it up because I didn't want to upset you, but maybe now is the time. Ella leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. What is it? Grace hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice barely a whisper. Thunder didn't always belong to Hank. He was once owned by your father. Ella's heart skipped a beat. What? My father? Grace nodded. Before the accident, before everything changed, your father was a renowned horse trainer. He worked with some of the most difficult horses in the country, and Thunder was one of his greatest successes. But Thunder was different. Even your father couldn't tame him completely. Ella's mind raced. So Hank, he's obsessed with Thunder because of my father? Grace's eyes were filled with sorrow. Yes, Hank was your father's protege, but he never had the same touch with horses. He wanted to prove himself, and Thunder was always the one that got away. Your father knew Thunder's spirit couldn't be broken, and that's why he gave up trying to control him. Hank, on the other hand, sees Thunder as a symbol of his own failure. He wants to break Thunder, to make him submit, to prove that he's better than your father ever was. Ella's breath caught in her throat. The revelation was staggering. All this time, she had thought Thunder's connection to her was a rare and beautiful thing. But it seemed that her father's shadow loomed large over both of their lives. "What does this mean for us?" Ella asked, her voice trembling. Grace looked at her daughter, her eyes filled with determination. "It means that Hank will stop at nothing to control Thunder. But it also means that you have a connection with Thunder that no one else can understand. Your father saw something in Thunder that no one else did. And now you do too." Ella turned to Thunder, who was now standing quietly in his stall, his large, intelligent eyes meeting hers. There was an undeniable bond between them, one that went beyond words or logic. "I won't let him take that away from us," Ella said, her voice strong. Dr. Landry, who had been silently observing, nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit, Ella. Hank may have his plans, but you've got something far more powerful, your connection with Thunder. And that will see you through whatever comes next." Ella's gaze hardened. She had no intention of backing down. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. The next few days were tense. Hank's actions had caused a stir in the small town, and whispers of his sabotage spread quickly. The festival organizers were investigating the incident, but many believed Hank had crossed a line this time. Despite the pressure, Ella continued her work with Thunder, training and bonding with him as much as possible. The more she worked with him, the more she understood him. Thunder wasn't just a wild, untamed creature. He was a survivor, much like herself. They were kindred spirits, each having faced adversity and come out stronger on the other side. But there was still the question of what Hank would do next. Ella had no doubt that he would come after Thunder again, and this time, she wouldn't be caught off guard. One evening, as Ella sat in the barn, going over her notes from the day's training session, Grace appeared with a concerned look on her face. "Ella, you need to see this," she said, holding out her phone. Ella took the phone, her fingers trembling as she looked at the screen. It was a message from an unknown number. "You're playing a dangerous game. Stay away from Thunder, or you'll regret it." Ella's heart raced. It was the second message like this in as many days. Whoever was sending these threats wasn't going to stop until they got what they wanted. Grace's voice was steady, but Ella could hear the worry beneath it. "We need to get the authorities involved, Ella. This is getting too dangerous." Ella looked at the phone, then at Thunder, who was peacefully resting in his stall. "I won't let them scare me. Thunder and I have come too far." But deep inside, Ella knew that the true battle was only just beginning. Hank was dangerous, and this time, he wasn't going to back down. The days grew heavier as the threat against Thunder escalated. Ella and Grace remained vigilant, but the tension in the air was palpable. Every creak of the barn, every rustle in the trees, seemed to carry the weight of danger. Hank's presence loomed over them, even when he wasn't physically there. Ella refused to be intimidated. Every morning, she woke up determined to work with Thunder, to prove to herself and to everyone around her that their bond was real and unbreakable. She had come too far to let fear dictate her actions. But despite her resolve, the threats continued to pour in, each one more threatening than the last. The anonymous messages were now being accompanied by strange occurrences. Thunder's stall was found open one morning, the lock tampered with, though no one could figure out how it happened. The rope burns on Thunder's legs, once healing, seemed to return mysteriously. Grace, growing increasingly worried, had insisted that Ella stay at home for the next few days. "We need to be careful, Ella," she said, her voice filled with concern. "We can't keep risking your safety like this." Ella, though, was adamant. "If we give up now, Hank wins. We can't let him break us, Mom." Grace looked into her daughter's determined eyes and, for the first time, saw something more than defiance. She saw the strength that had always been there, the unshakable will to persevere. "All right," Grace said softly, her voice full of love and resignation. "But we do this carefully. I'll go with you every step of the way." It wasn't long before Ella received a call from the festival organizers. They had completed their investigation into Hank's behavior, and he was being suspended from any future involvement in the festival. But there was a larger issue at hand. Hank had a history, a pattern of sabotaging horses in his care, using extreme methods to control them. Methods that had once earned him a reputation as a ruthless trainer. Ella was taken aback. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" she demanded. The organizer on the other end of the line hesitated. We wanted to protect you, Ella. Hank's reputation has been under wraps for a long time, but we're looking into pressing charges. You may need to testify. Ella's stomach dropped. The weight of the situation was growing heavier with each passing day. She knew that the charges against Hank were serious, but she had no idea how deep his obsession with Thunder ran. As the evening sun set on the quiet town, a feeling of unease settled in. Ella was alone in the barn, brushing Thunder's mane, when she heard the faint sound of footsteps behind her. She froze, her heart pounding. The sound was soft, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Before she could turn around, a dark figure stepped into the doorway of the barn. Ella's breath caught in her throat. It was Hank. He stood in the shadows, his face hard and unreadable. I told you, he said, his voice cold. You don't belong here with him. Thunder doesn't need you, Ella. He never needed you. He's mine. Ella's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. She didn't back down. She had come too far to let him intimidate her now. He's not yours, Hank, Ella said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. Thunder doesn't belong to anyone. He's free, and he chooses who he trusts. Hank took a step forward, his jaw clenched. You don't understand. This isn't about you or your pathetic little connection with him. It's about control. Thunder's the last piece of my legacy, and I'm not letting anyone take that from me. Ella shook her head. You're wrong, Hank. You're so consumed by control that you don't even see what's right in front of you. Thunder is not a tool for you to use. He's a living being, and I'm the one who understands him, not you. The silence in the barn was thick with tension. For a moment, it seemed as though time stood still. Ella stared at Hank, waiting for him to make his move. But then, something in his eyes shifted. A flicker of doubt, of something deeper and more desperate. You're just like him, Hank muttered, his voice trembling. You're just like your father. You think you can tame him, control him, but you can't. No one can. Ella's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Hank let out a bitter laugh, his eyes glinting, with a mixture of rage and despair. Your father was the only one who came close, the only one who understood Thunder, but he left me behind. He chose you, Ella, and he left me to rot in his shadow. Ella's mind spun. You're saying that's why you've been doing this? Because of my father? Hank nodded slowly, his face twisted with resentment. Your father was everything I wanted to be. He had the horses, the respect, the power. And when he left me behind, I couldn't accept it. Thunder was the only thing that could prove I was better than him. But he never trusted me. He never trusted anyone. And now you're here, taking everything from me. Ella stepped back, her breath catching in her throat. The depth of Hank's obsession was more than she had ever realized. It wasn't just Thunder he wanted. It was the legacy, the approval, the power her father had once held. I don't want to take anything from you, Hank, Ella said softly, her voice filled with a quiet understanding. But I won't let you destroy Thunder. I won't let you destroy me either. For a long moment, there was only silence. Hank stood there, his eyes dark, his fists clenched. Then, without warning, he turned and stormed out of the barn, disappearing into the night. Ella let out a shaky breath, her body trembling. She knew this was far from over. Hank's bitterness ran deep, and his obsession with Thunder would not fade easily. But one thing was certain. Ella was ready for whatever came next. The following days were a blur of anticipation and uncertainty. Ella couldn't shake the feeling that Hank wasn't done with them. She had known that his obsession with Thunder was far from over, but she hadn't realized how deeply it had rooted itself in his soul. Now, more than ever, Ella knew she couldn't back down. She had to protect Thunder, no matter the cost. Grace remained by her side, but Ella saw the worry in her eyes. They both knew the stakes had risen. The festival organizers had promised to keep an eye on Hank, but Ella didn't trust him. She couldn't. He had already shown he was willing to go to any lengths to destroy their bond with Thunder, and Ella feared he might escalate things further. As the days passed, Ella and Thunder grew closer. Their connection, already deep, became a lifeline for both of them. Ella saw Thunder not just as a wild creature, but as a symbol of her own struggle. She had come through her own battles, and so had he. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. The night before the final event of the festival, Ella couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts swirling. The air felt heavy, as though a storm was approaching. She had an overwhelming sense that Hank was preparing for something big, something she couldn't predict. Suddenly, she heard a noise, a soft thud coming from the direction of the barn. Her heart skipped a beat. Grabbing her wheelchair, she wheeled herself quickly down the hallway, her pulse racing. When she reached the barn, she froze. Thunder was agitated, his eyes wide, his body tense, and standing in the shadows, just beyond the door, was Hank. "I knew you wouldn't listen to me, Ella." Hank's voice was low, almost a growl. "I warned you. Now you'll see the consequences of your defiance." Ella's heart pounded in her chest. She tried to steady her breath, pushing aside her fear. "What are you going to do, Hank?" she demanded. Hank stepped forward, a cruel smile curling on his lips. "I'm going to finish what I started. Thunder belongs to me. You'll see that, one way or another." Ella's hands tightened around the armrests of her wheelchair. "You've lost your mind. Thunder is no one's possession. You're obsessed with something you can't control." Hank took another step toward Thunder, who had become more agitated, his hooves pawing at the ground. Ella could feel the tension building. She knew Hank had always tried to dominate Thunder, but now it seemed like he was willing to go to extremes. "You don't understand," Hank said, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. "I have nothing left. Thunder is my last chance to prove I'm worth something." Ella's eyes softened as she looked at Hank, but her voice remained firm. "Prove to who? Hank? To my father? To yourself? Thunder is free, and he's not yours to prove anything to." In that moment, a loud crash echoed through the barn. The back gate had been opened, and Thunder bolted forward, breaking free from his stall. Ella's heart raced. Hank made a move to chase after him, but Ella quickly intervened, using the momentum of her wheelchair to block his path. "You're not going near him," she shouted, her voice shaking with emotion. Hank glared at her, his face filled with rage. "You don't get it, do you? I'm going to break him, just like I was broken." Ella's heart ached for Hank, but she couldn't let him destroy Thunder. She knew that the moment she allowed fear to take control, it would all be lost. Without thinking, she wheeled herself toward Thunder, who was pacing at the far end of the barn. She spoke softly, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Thunder, it's okay. I'm here. We're in this together." Thunder turned to her, his eyes meeting hers, and in that moment, something clicked. The wild, untamed creature who had once resisted every attempt to control him seemed to relax. Slowly, cautiously, Thunder began to approach her, his movements soft and deliberate. Hank stood in shock, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. Ella reached out a hand toward Thunder, her heart full of love and trust. And as the magnificent horse finally approached her, lowering his head in submission, the crowd outside the barn that had gathered for the final festival event erupted into applause. Grace, who had followed Ella into the barn, stepped forward, a look of pride and relief on her face. "You did it, Ella. You showed him." Ella didn't answer. She was too focused on Thunder, her hand gently stroking his mane. He was no longer the wild, untamable horse Hank had once tried to control. He was her partner, her friend, her companion in a world that sometimes felt too big and too harsh. Hank stood there for a moment, defeated. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time, he seemed truly broken. "I don't understand," he whispered, his voice hollow. Ella looked up at him, her voice soft but strong. "It's not about control, Hank. It's about trust. It's about seeing the truth, even when it's hard." Hank turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy and distant. The final event of the festival came and went, but the real victory had already been won. Ella had proven to herself, to Thunder, and to the world that true strength comes from connection, from empathy, and from the courage to trust, even in the face of fear. In the days that followed, Ella and Thunder became the heart of the festival, their bond a symbol of hope, healing, and the power of love. And for Ella, the most extraordinary part was that she had found her own place in the world again. Not defined by her accident, but by her courage, her heart, and the incredible bond she shared with the wild horse who had shown her what it meant to be free.